So I can't wait to bring on our next guest. This is a guy who's doing some awesome work, and I'm so excited to introduce him. Rick Green is a national speaker and radio host. He leads a program called Patriot Academy that we're going to hear about. He trains young leaders across the country in America's founding principles. He's a former Texas state representative, and he now travels the country inspiring audiences across the nation. So, Rick, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Let's have some fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing is I was looking through your bio and, all the things that you've done, and there's several things that stuck out to me. The first one was I think you got your undergraduate at Angelo State. Is that right?
Yeah, San Angelo, Texas.
Yeah, so I was going to tell you, I spent a year and a half there. That's, being in the military, my day job, I got assigned there as my first base. And, God bless Texas, and he blessed me by getting me stationed there. And then that's actually where I met my wife in another place I think you're familiar with, which was Austin, Texas. We actually met up there, took her out on the first one, and then back to San Angelo. She was assigned there too, so we were both active duty at the time. And I had a great time. I lived over there by Sunset Mall. Had my little apartment,
man.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. The oasis of West Texas. I loved San Angelo. I mean, great food, great restaurants. You got the, 3 lakes and little Concho River goes through there. That's not what people typically think of for West Texas.
Yeah, I went to the little Baptist church out there and had an awesome time. And I've got a story for you I think you'll appreciate because we have some commonality, in our faith, which is I was going through our training, and at the time my wife and I had only been dating for a few weeks. And they started passing out, here's your next assignment. This is what you're going to do in the military. And they told me you're going to Germany. And they told her you're going to Hawaii, which is just opposite directions. And, I was like, well, that's a bummer because, we're both pretty strong Christians and we're excited about the future. And so we prayed about it and, we talked to our instructors and, we said, that we would love to be stationed together. And our instructor said, the only way that's going to happen, Wes, is if you get married right on the spot. Go to the courthouse right now and get married. And, after praying about it, we said, God was telling me, don't rush it. Trust him with this and it'll work out. And I was terrified because I thought I'm going to lose this girl. And, she's just the best thing that ever happened to me. And so we went back to the instructor a couple of days and we said, we do love each other, but we don't want to rush it. We're not going to get married yet because we don't think it's the right time. And we'll make it work, doing the long distance thing for 3 years or however long. And then a couple weeks later, we get our assignments. And I was like, well, this is weird. I didn't get Germany. I got Virginia. And I was like, what'd you get, hon? And she's like, I got Virginia too.
No.
And there's a founding father who I'm sure you're aware of who said that God governs in the affairs of men. And that was certainly my experience. So when I think of St. Angelo, I think of that, man.
That's cool.
But yeah, so let's get to what you're doing though. So, you do it looks like a couple different courses, and one of them is the Emergency Citizens Defense course. Can you tell us about that and what inspired you to do it?
Sure. Yeah. So we do all kinds of Constitution programs, whether it's with young people, with pastors, with churches, with, anybody that wants to study the Constitution. And our website, constitutioncoach.com, lays out those different programs. And since COVID hit, we've been giving away our courses for free, training people to be Constitution coaches so they can host classes on Zoom or in their living room or whatever it might be. And then all the riots and the looting started. And we've been doing a class for a couple of years now we call Constitutional Defense. And it's a combination of the intellectual ammunition of really understanding the Second Amendment and also having the mental awareness to avoid a situation before it happens and the mental wherewithal to get through a situation if you have to. So that intellectual ammunition combined with the physical training. The old expression, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, is only partially right. It's actually, in order to stop a bad guy with a gun, you need a trained good guy with a gun. It's not enough to just carry a weapon or having grown up around them, to have actual training for those situations. I learned that the hard way. I went, my first time 8 years ago to go through a simulation house, thought, hey, I got this. I'm type A, no problem. And I literally froze up, mentally couldn't get past some decisions I had to make and was worried about, I'm an attorney. So I was all worried, thinking legal ramifications and all these things. And it made me freeze. And I realized, man, I'm not ready. Yeah. And my family would have been harmed. And so it changed my whole attitude about this. So I've challenged people for 8 years now to get that training. But man, when these mobs started showing up, and pulling people out of cars, assaulting them, kids getting shot literally. Now they're in the suburbs. People are worried, and they've been calling us like crazy saying, what do I do? What am I allowed to do legally? How do I think about this the right way? Where do I go for training? So we set up this website to give people a chance to learn very quickly at defense2020.com. They can just watch. I've got some little 3-minute videos. They can go through that series of videos and learn the history of the Second Amendment. What did the founders really want with that? And then also begin to learn, what can I do in my state? Because it's different in every state just a little bit. And then get signed up. And we're giving the courses away for free. Even giving the physical training away for free. This is a $1,000 training. We're giving it away for free.
Yeah, let's kind of break it down. So start with the physical training first. So that speaks to me. I can tell you right now, in my previous jobs, one of the things that I did was teach college kids how to protect themselves. So we would do active shooter drills for ROTC and that type of thing because, all of a sudden, since Virginia Tech happened years ago in 2008, I think it was, but there's been a string of on-campus, unfortunately, incidents that have happened. And the best thing that we found that we could do is train our folks on what to do if an active shooter occurred. And I've watched that training kind of develop from, well, just run and hide to, if you have to, defend yourself. And what's amazing is we did drills and trained our people, and we had the local campus cops and, local law enforcement telling us that you could spot, a kid who went through our program because whenever there either was a drill or an actual active shooter, they were the first ones to snap into action. So can you talk about that? What's the difference that you've seen on the physical side in terms of the folks that you've put through it?
Night and day, man. Totally night and day. And we have a mix. I mean, we put 1,000 people through this in the last 2 years. We've got 500 people going with us in just the next 3 months. But we have people that never touched a gun in their life. And they come spend, 5 days with us through this course. And they're comfortable by the end of the week. They're ready to carry. I don't know about you, man. I had my license for about almost 15 years and didn't carry because I was worried about what might happen, negligent discharge, all those things. After I went through this course, total confidence in carrying. I carry everywhere now. And that's what we've seen with our students. Some that, like I said, never touched a gun in their life. Others that, like me, grew up around, guns on the ranch and, knew how to handle them, knew basically safety, but not skill level. Didn't know. I didn't even know what a trigger reset was.
Sure.
In a half a day, these guys took me to a whole new level in terms of my skills. But the part that I think is most important is that mental part. There's something about going through this course that by the end of that course, you are mentally ready and you look at things differently. It's very much like what you guys were teaching. Yeah. You sit differently, you watch differently. You're in right now with the situation in the country. I'm telling everybody you need to be in condition yellow all the time. You cannot zone out at this point. You've got to be paying attention so that you can avoid the situation completely if possible. But then if you have to, how do you get your family through it safely? And by the way, it's fun too. This is not a drill sergeant situation. They make it fun. It's good fellowship. We hang out. I do the Constitution class in the evenings, and then we shoot on the range with the instructors during the day. And these instructors are phenomenal. It's not like a lot of, you've probably been through some of these courses where the instructor is some former SEAL or whatever, right. And it's more about them showing off, all their skill level. And nothing against the SEALs, obviously, and their skills are mad. I couldn't come close to those guys. But the course is not about this person who's never fired a gun before getting good. It's about that instructor showing off. That's not what this is like at all. It's a great environment. It's fun. And I promise everybody that goes to it will ramp up their skill level tremendously.
Professional is what I'm getting from it. Yeah. So let's link that to the Constitution then. Is you talk about the confidence that comes from being able to exercise your rights appropriately. Isn't that what our founding fathers intended? So kind of work me through the intellectual side. When we talk about the rights that the Constitution is protecting, we talk about the Bill of Rights and all of this. What was the vision that the founding fathers had? And what do you think that they would think of your course?
It's interesting as you go through the founding fathers, and you can go, judicial, two fathers of American jurisprudence like Joseph Story and James Kent. You can go over to founders like St. George Tucker, who ended up judicial, but he was a soldier in the war and then trained by George Wythe, who was the dean of the Virginia delegation at the Declaration. In fact, this St. George Tucker guy, he was known as the American Blackstone because he basically took Blackstone and edited it to American law. But all of these guys said almost the exact same thing. They said that self-defense is, quote, the first law of nature, that without this one, all the other ones don't matter, that you can watch anywhere in nature, and if those cubs are being attacked, that mama bear is going to take care of things. Same thing with human beings. You have an innate sense of, my baby's about to be harmed. I'm going to step in. If I'm not trained, I'm just going to throw my body in front of whatever's happening here. So there's a first law of nature here. And that's why when the founders did the Second Amendment, it had nothing to do with hunting. I'm a hunter. I love hunting, but it's not about pheasants. It's about freedom. It's not about white-tailed deer. This is literally about being able to defend yourself in the moment. and also to be able to keep a tyrannical government at bay. And so part of what we do actually the first night of this course is I do a Constitution crash course, and I go through the whole Constitution in about 2.5 hours. It's what I call a 30,000 feet view. And then the second night, I do a total focus on the Second Amendment. And so it's quote after quote after quote of the Founding Fathers and bringing us right up to today and all the objections of the day. Oh, well, that's only for weapons of war and all these objections that we get today. We have a lot of fun with quotes from Joe Biden that make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And we demolish those. And anyway, it's a really fun time, but it is very intellectual in terms of just getting some intellectual ammo. So when you're sitting around the dinner table at Thanksgiving, and that brother-in-law saying, oh, you don't need that gun, the police will take care of things, or whatever, that you've got some intellectual responses to those kind of things.
Well, you've mentioned before, I think, the Castle Doctrine, right? This responsibility that we have to not just rely on the government or the state, but to take some responsibility for ourselves, for our own lives, for our families' lives, for our property, and that is actually intertwined in what the founders did, and they expected us to do that. But how can you do that without the right training and awareness, and I think that's what you're providing.
No, you're right. And there was a guy, James Wilson, he signed both founding documents, the Declaration and the Constitution. He served on the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, he's the first guy Washington nominated to serve. And he said, I love the way he put this. He basically said, if you get robbed in your house, that's your fault. And he quotes the Castle Doctrine, which goes all the way back to the Old Testament. I mean, we usually take it back to the 1600s in England, but it really goes back to the Old Testament. And he says, look, it's your responsibility. You cannot expect the police to be in every home. We wouldn't want that. That's a police state. You wouldn't want the police on every corner. And the joke used to be, or not joke, but the reality used to be, and I'm a back the blue guy, man, all the way, even during all this nonsense of the last couple of months. My brother-in-law is a sergeant. I mean, I could go on and on about that. But we've always said, look, when you need the police in seconds, they're minutes away. And that's just the reality of life. You can't change that. But right now, in this situation in the country where the politicians are defunding, Austin, Texas, right where I live, 30 minutes from my house, just took away 1/3 of the police budget. They're defunding the police, they're demoralizing the police, and they're literally telling the police to stand down. These precincts are being burned, people are being hurt, and they're telling the police, making them literally back off and stand down. You cannot count on the government to protect you. The founders knew that. They said, this is your responsibility as a free citizen. Make sure that you're trained. Make sure that you're prepared. I'm actually excited to see there's been some, even some of the more popular Supreme Court decisions, Heller and others, where they specifically said training itself is a core part of the Second Amendment. It's not just the right to have that gun. It's the right to be trained with that gun. And I really challenge people, if you don't go with us, get some training locally, find somebody that can get you some good training and then start preparing to defend your family.
Yeah, it's that notion that the best way to preserve our freedoms is to exercise them responsibly, and I see that
right.
In what you're doing. You mentioned the Old Testament, you mentioned, the inspiration that has for the founders. One of the other rights that you talk about a lot is the right to free association. You talk a lot about churches. You talk about the struggles that are going on with COVID-19 restrictions now. Do you see that right being in danger as well? And how would you recommend that we defend that one?
Huge, man. And you think about a church that's told they can't meet. That's a violation of frankly, in today's world, every one of the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment, because you're violating their freedom of religion. You're violating that pastor's freedom of speech. You're violating their freedom of assembly. Right now, frankly, it's literally a place where we are petitioning our government for a redress of grievance. So you're violating that, preventing that pastor from speaking out on these things. And frankly, go back to the founding era, those pastors were the press in many ways. They were the ones getting up in the pulpit and sharing whatever the issues of the day were and helping us to have perspective on that. So all 5 freedoms, when you tell a church, you can't even gather. Even if you're going to do all these precautions, like MacArthur's church out in California, they've said, okay, fine, we'll do masks, we'll do social distancing. And that judge finally, a state district judge in California, finally said, okay, yeah, you guys can meet while we're having this trial. So I never thought I would see it in my life. I never thought I would see the churches lay down so easily. I can understand a couple of weeks saying, hey, until we know how bad this thing is, we're going to take precautions for our church. That's common sense. But 160 days or whatever it is now that we're into it, we know this thing is only a 0.1% killer. That means 99.9% are going to be fine. You look back at 1918, we just don't know our history. In 1918, Spanish flu was a 2.5% killer. That means 25 times more deadly than what we're dealing with now. And even then, you didn't have churches shut down for months. They shut down some of them in some of the big cities for a few weeks. If you want to get into some policy or even political theory of how a society should work, I don't think even liberals don't think that one person should be able to make law for an entire state and enforce that law. And that's what you have in 47 of the 50 states right now is one person, the governor, is controlling that state, making the law up as he goes or she goes, and then being the one to enforce it as well. Thank God for the gal out in South Dakota, Kristi Noem. She's setting the example. I'm going to write a book on leadership about her when this whole thing is over because she has done it exactly right. She's trusted her people. She's done common sense, provisions where it was needed. But other than that, said, we're not going to violate the Constitution. We're not going to go off the cliff with all these other governors. But, man, there's only 3 states that have not done that, gone off the cliff.
One of the first things that happened when this hit was I set my family down and I said, what's our plan? Let's say, that I get it or that, my wife gets it or if one of our kids gets sick. What's our plan? And we looked at our insurance. We kind of wrote out, these are the different urgent cares, emergency rooms, the people that we knew, who's our support network, right? From our church. And so if this is something that we deal with, and I've had several friends who have had it, we immediately go to a plan. And again, having that course of action in our minds and laid out is what you need to do because that's responsible use of your freedom. I can only express concern for folks who don't, and that seems to be pretty common with a lot of the government strategies that I see that are not following, what you're talking about in South Dakota, where it seems like they didn't take the time to actually formulate a good plan, and now they're struggling as a result because they haven't, they're just moving so fast and under such fear, so it's actually very similar, as if you take the time to learn how to use a firearm appropriately, God forbid that bad day comes when you have to defend your home. You know what to do. You have a plan. And it's the same thing, I think, with this.
You're right, man. Yeah. You're spot on with that, Wes, because, think about it. It's literally in both situations, we're in the mess we're in because of civic ignorance, not knowing our freedoms, not knowing our rights, and not planning for how to live those things out. And I'm like you. We took this thing very seriously. We actually sequestered our family initially and said, look, we travel for a living. I've got a daughter-in-law that lives on the property with us that has an autoimmune issue. My wife's grandmother, who's 86, lives out here with us. So we said, hey, I'm not going to go speak at some deal and get it and bring it home and put them in danger. So we shut down and said, hey, for us, we can work from home. We're going to lose a lot of money and whatever, but we can do this. We can make this work. And so we took all the precautions. We went, we're kind of germaphobes anyway, my wife and I. We bathe in hand sanitizer when we're on the plane as it is. So, so we took those precautions. But I could not believe 2 weeks later when my own governor in Texas shut down the economy and did this nonsense that Gavin Newsom started out in California. That whole idea of shelter in place, this probably better than I do. That was never intended to be for a pandemic. That was a hurricane comes through or is on its way through, shelter in place for a few hours or maybe a couple of days if the place was devastated. Yeah. These governors are claiming the right to control the movement of every human being in their state. It's more Soviet-like than it is American-like. It's just unbelievable, and I think you nailed it. It's a lack of planning, and it's power hungry. These people love having the control. It's the nature of man, as these founding fathers would have said. That's why they had those checks and balances, and we're just ignoring those checks and balances.
That's the other part. Getting to them is, we talk about personal responsibility and that being a big part of the equation. I think the other part is knowing that you can't control everything, and to me, that's where my faith comes in. Is I'm expected to do what is within my power and control. I get back to that story of my wife and I didn't sit there and do nothing. I took a stand, with that instructor, and I said, hey man, I do love her. I do want to marry her, but I want to do it in God's timing. And so I did take a stand on that. And then I trusted God with the results. And sometimes he's going to say no. Sometimes he's going to say, wait. I had no idea how that was going to play out. But that's part of life. That's part of life is trusting, that creator to be able to orchestrate things according to his will, as long as we are doing, what he asked of us. How important do you think that belief was for the founders? Do you think it was something that they just kind of threw on because they knew a lot of people had some type of religious experience, or was it something that they deeply felt? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you read their writings, there is no other conclusion you can come to than that these guys either absolutely believed it or they were really good at reciting it over and over and over and over and over again throughout their life, even in their private letters. And that is not to say that they were, Bible-thumping evangelicals like we might think of as a Christian today. but they were absolutely believers in God. 95% of them were outspoken Christians. They lived it, they talked it, they wrote it, they spoke it. We've got at Wall Builders, my co-host on radio, David Barton, largest private collection of Founding Fathers documents in the world. So when we say these things, we're talking about coming straight from their letters, straight from their speeches, straight from the laws that they put in place when they were in charge. Their faith is undeniable. There's a handful. There's about 10 guys out of 250. There's about 240, really exact number, 247 that are considered the founders based on their signers of the deck, their signers of the Constitution, governors at the time, major generals, their key players, key leaders. And out of all those guys, man, there's only about 10 that you could say were not Christians. Yeah. Now, those 10 are not atheists, but they are sort of they believe in God. They believe God's involved in our life. You can't even say they're deists because they don't believe in a watchmaker God. You look at Franklin's speech at the convention that you were just quoting from. Yeah. I mean, here's a least religious founder, and he's talking about the hand of God and providence and illuminating our thoughts. That's not a deist. That's maybe somebody's not a Christian because he doesn't believe in the divinity of Christ. But you couldn't call him a deist. And same goes for those other 9 or 10. Thomas Paine's probably the closest that you could get to that. And even he believed in intelligent design. So, yeah, we could go through a lot of those guys. But I think the general message is they absolutely believed in God. It permeated their thought. I mean, one historian put it this way. It was the atmosphere they were breathing. So that biblical worldview is what really drove their design of everything. Yeah, they were reading Montesquieu. Absolutely, they were reading Locke. Mm-hmm. They were reading Blackstone. But they quoted the Bible 3 or 4 times as many times as they quoted any one of those guys. And Locke himself, one of the guys, Richard Henry Lee, at the signing of the Declaration, he said that essentially the Declaration was copied. Jefferson essentially copied it directly from Locke's 2 treatises of government. Right. And when you go read those, man, you got like 1,400 and something, I forget the exact number, Bible verses. Right. So even Locke was saying, hey, you want to have free society? Look at all these scriptures and it'll tell you, basically give you the instruction manual for it. It's really powerful when you get into it and you start reading it.
Yeah, a couple points on that. I mean, one of the reasons we name our channel after Edmund Burke is because here was a British guy and he saw the difference between what America was doing in the 18th century and what France was doing. And people expected that he would love both the way that Thomas Paine did, and he said absolutely not. And people said, why? He was like, because in America they have the virtue and the temperament and the maturity for freedom. We should give it to them. He was arguing in Parliament, why are we invading? We should be celebrating their rise to maturity. And then they said, well, what do you think about France? And he said, no, because there is no basis for virtue here. There is an anger, a deep resentment, a godlessness here that is going to turn out very bad. And of course it did with the Reign of Terror and eventually Napoleon Bonaparte. And he could see the difference based upon the virtue. That's my point. And then my second one is I think when atheists look at the founders, they see a little bit of, the founders holding back some of their deepest beliefs. Like with Washington, some of his deepest religious beliefs were pretty private. And they just kind of assumed that they were non-existent. But I mean, help me out with this. When I'm in a room and I've got a Catholic, a Methodist, a Baptist, an Episcopalian, typically we agree on God and we're big fans of Jesus. And we kind of keep some of those like very specific, intimate things to ourselves until we know exactly what our company is at. And when you realize the diversity of the founders, you realize that they all came from different denominations and were working together, I think I would follow Washington's model of, keeping some of that in my journal, keeping the Bible between him and Martha kind of closely held and focusing on what we agree on. And yet, an atheist would look at that and say, well, why aren't you being more explicit about your faith? And it's because I'm respecting some of the differences within Christianity that is not monolithic. So that's kind of my take on it.
No, you're exactly right. That's absolutely what they did. That's why you don't see those mentions in the Constitution, even that you see in the Declaration. Now, they believe the Declaration was part of the Constitution, and we, that's a whole other topic. But I'll give you 2 quick Washington stories. I mean, first of all, from that quote, when Franklin said those things at the Constitutional Convention, that was the point where everything was falling apart. Delegates had already left. It wasn't going to work. Absolutely. And so he brought their attention. He said, how could we do this without God? We have to have him or we're not going to be able to succeed. And Washington himself talked about it later. He said, at that moment, we broke. We went to church. Our attitudes changed. We came back. It was very, very different as soon as they had done that. And but don't forget, Washington was there. Let's see, this would have been 87 to 74, so 13 years earlier. He was there at that first Continental Congress where they brought in the Reverend Jacob DeShay, prayed for 3 hours. Washington never left his knees. I mean, that was a very public expression of faith. But my favorite is when he's leaving public life. And he had tried to leave public life after the war, and they said, no, we want you to be president. And so he says, all right, I'll come back. And then he's leaving after president. He could have been president till he died if he wanted to. Yeah. And yet he decided he was done. And in his farewell address, he gave a warning to the American people. And he said, of all the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Not just a good idea. He said they're indispensable supports. And the reason is because he's watching the French Revolution take place. And he's looking and he's going, what's the difference? We have liberty and freedom under God. They're trying to have liberty without God. Libertas, but no God. They kill all the priests, the guillotine, the whole 9 yards. It leads to chaos. And then he said, in vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism that would work to subvert these great pillars, religion and morality. Because you think about it. You can't have liberty if you don't have morality. And you only have morality if you have religion teaching you what that is. And people that would say, well, we can have liberty without morality. Look at the mobs right now. Right. If you can't get to your car without being raped, murdered, or stolen from, you don't have liberty. Yeah. And so the more we lose the morality, the more we lose the liberty. And Washington definitely knew that.
Well, and that's my last thought for you, is just to kind of share that, is because when I think about human rights, what I really connect that to is being created in the image of God, right? Because I think of rights as a way to kind of legalize that perspective as much as we possibly can, is to recognize there is value in every human being, and we can codify that in the Constitution and our laws to be able to recognize what God did for us. And that fills me, Rick, with a sense of humility and awe and wonder about, who God is, because I look at human beings and what they're capable of, and the virtue that we can express when we follow, his direction. And it doesn't fill me with a sense of entitlement. It fills me more with a desire to do good. And out of that good comes the preservation of freedom, which we've talked about. So anyway, I support everything you're doing. I really appreciate you taking the time for us. Love all the great discussion about the course. Can you remind us that website one more time?
Yeah, you bet, man. Defense2020.com. The course is free. And if you can't travel and come to the course with us, then get the Constitution class. We even have a box set that has the course on video. But just start studying. Don't take your freedom for granted. Don't be spoiled. We tend to be that way when we've had freedom for so long. We take advantage of it and we take it for granted. With every right comes a responsibility. And frankly, right now, we're losing our freedoms because we haven't accepted the responsibility of studying what produces freedom and what's my job as a citizen. What am I supposed to do to make sure this thing lasts for future generations? And that's part of what we teach in that course.
Amen to that. Thank you, Rick. Thanks for your time today.
God bless you, man. Thanks for having me.
All right.